Greetings. This lecture discusses the emergence of Europe and how European people adapted to the civilization they inherited from the ancient world. The Greeks, perhaps taking the Assyrian term for West, coined the word Europe. However, the Greeks knew little about this region in the West. Even after Gaul, Britain, and German regions became part of the Roman Empire, the Romans continued to view Europe as on the periphery. When the Roman Empire in the West collapsed, Europe began to expand and develop its own identity with a strong Christian theme. Rome's persecution of Christians seemed to have the effect of strengthening Christianity rather than discouraging it. In 306, Constantine inherited the title of the new Augustus of the West, and he became the undisputed ruler of Spain and other Western Europe regions. In 312, he campaigned against Maxentius, who controlled Italy and Africa. Claiming to have a divine blessing from Christ, Constantine was victorious in battle against Maxentius in Italy. Constantine ordered the end of persecution of Christians. The empire eventually passed in the hands of Emperor Valentinian, formerly a Christian soldier, who divided the empire as West and East. He controlled the West, and his brother Valens controlled the East. A series of events led to the contraction of the empire as invaders made gains on multiple fronts. The Visigoths attacked in the east, and German tribes and other groups attacked in the west. The so-called barbarians from the German region were not primitive people unaware of Roman life. As neighbors of the Roman Empire who admired the wealth and power of the Romans, they were familiar with Roman civilization. In fact, they had carried out trade with the Romans. What became problematic for the Roman Empire was absorbing the huge surge of German refugees pressured by the migration of the Huns from the east. Although the Western Roman Empire prolonged its existence by forming alliances with many of these German peoples, it eventually disintegrated. There was no disintegration in the East. The contrast between the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, is notable. The Byzantine Empire got its name from the Greek label for Byzantium, which became the city of Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire was far advanced over the Western Roman Empire. There was a larger population and greater prosperity. It had advantages of a more defensible location, skillful emperors, and a strong navy. The Eastern and Western understanding, practice, and organization of Christianity was different. There were disagreements on church leadership. As one historian writes, the Pope in Rome resisted domination by the Byzantine emperor, and the Byzantines denied the Pope's claim to authority over all Christians. Despite its early connection to Rome, Byzantium was influenced more by Greek culture. In addition to its intellectual contributions, the Byzantine Empire served as a protective barrier for Eastern Europe and Central Europe against Arab and later Muslim encroachments. After the collapse of the western half of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine eastern section survived for another millennium and dominated the Eastern Mediterranean world politically and economically. Although the Byzantines carried the torch of civilization, any suggestion about ruling a united empire was unrealistic. Turning to the West, one sees that the rise of Europe took time. It slowly recovered from centuries of invasion and the collapse of Roman power. At least two foundations of European society came out of the early medieval years. First, while no European state was powerful enough to restore centralized rule, the age did witness a return to political order with a decentralized feudal political structure. This was the foundation of future European nations. Second, the Christian church inspired religious leadership and cultural unity in Western Europe. The decline of pagan religions and greater evidence of strong church-state relationships ushered in a new era. After the fall of Rome, several Germanic tribes established small states, but none of them came close to extending their authority and centralizing power. By the early 6th century, the Ostrogoths dominated Italy. In Italy, King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths utilized both Roman civil law and Gothic military organization, and tolerated both Orthodox and Arian Christians. The rule of Theodoric was 475 to the year 526. Now, getting back the difference between Orthodox and Arian Christians. Arians were followers of a priest from Alexandria named Arius, who lived from the year 260 to 336. The Arians believed Jesus had been a mortal human being and that he was the creation of God rather than a divine being co-eternal with God. Theodoric used the Roman bureaucracy and the authority he had received from the Byzantine emperor to govern his people. His willingness to exercise religious toleration encouraged leading intellectuals and bureaucrats to serve his regime. With his leadership, there were several decades of peace in Italy. However, Theodoric's death in 526 led to internal conflict and a protracted period of plague and warfare between the West and the Eastern Emperor Justinian I. Without success, Justinian attempted to recover the lost territories that had been lost to the Germans. But there was also something rather shocking, interesting about his reign. It was during his reign there was a terrible plague. The plague of Justinian in the 540s was the first pandemic. Its effects lasted from the 6th to the 8th century. As William Rosen argues in his book, Justinian's Flea, Plague, Empire, and the Birth of Europe, it killed 25 million people, depopulated entire cities, and depressed birth rates for generations. Plague facilitated the Lombard conquest of Italy in 568. Like the Ostrogoths, the Lombards were Germanic. Rejecting Roman administration, the Lombards divided Italy into military districts administered by dukes and converted them from Arian to Orthodox Christianity. Rome was able to defend itself against the Lombards, and it remained independent. The Italian peninsula experienced turmoil since each district or small state preyed on one another. In fact, fragmentation in Italy was the norm for the next 1,200 years. Further to the west, the Franks, who earlier were a pack of German tribes located on the lower region of the Rhine River, represent an enduring legacy. A tribal chief, when he was a teenager, Clovis, became king of the Franks. The Franks worshiped ancient Germanic gods, but Clovis converted to Christianity in the year 496, claiming that the Christian God gave the Franks victory in a major battle. Church leaders welcomed this development. As a result of Clovis embracing Orthodox Christianity, the Franks became the first Germanic tribe to convert to the Orthodox faith. This allowed them to intermarry with the Romano-Celts and begin the process of developing a common culture. Before his death in the year 511, Clovis expanded his kingdom to the point that some call him the founder of France. His enlarged kingdom, divided between his sons, was the ancestor of France and Germany. The Visigoths, who sacked Rome in the year 410, later dominated Spain and southern Gaul. They sought to unify the people in Spain through Roman law and force conversion to Arianism. Well, this created problems with their Catholic subjects until the Visigoths converted to Orthodox Christianity in the year 589. Economic prosperity in Spain enriched Visigothic leaders, but they squandered opportunities fighting among themselves. A Muslim invasion of Spain brought the Visigoth kingdom to an end in the year 711. And Spain, consequently, was a Muslim country for many centuries. Other Germanic peoples were the Angles and Saxons, who took over Britain in the early 400s. Later referred to as the Anglo-Saxons, they had small kingdoms loosely confederated under a dominant king. Deeply antagonistic to Roman culture, these kingdoms rested on a base of warfare, plunder, and farming. Missionaries converted these pagan peoples in a twofold Christianizing campaign that began when the Irish monk Columba established a base for itinerant monks at a monastery on an island off the coast of Scotland. And the year for Columba was 521 to 597. A monk with close family ties to powerful Irish families, Columba had already founded monasteries in Ireland. With their missionary work in Scotland, Irish monks established the tradition of a Celtic and decentralized church. Additional evidence of their mission efforts was the successful conversion of the Picts in northern Scotland. Again, the Picts becoming Christian people. The conversion of England was the missionary goal of Pope Gregory. Born in a senatorial Christian family approximately 540, Gregory became a governor by the Emperor Justin II. In the year 574, he gave his wealth away and embraced monasticism. He became the Pope in 590, and 6 years later, he sent monks to convert the English and establish the basis for an episcopal church. Christian culture flourished in Britain, which supplied the continent with missionaries throughout the 8th century. However, Viking invaders arrived, destroyed the Anglo-Saxon civilization, and actually brought Western civilization to a low point. Political leadership in the emerging Europe evolved slowly. The kings of early Europe had limited power. Unable to regulate blood feuds, they had little authority over aristocrats. Aristocrats combined the Germanic and Roman heritage with Christianity to assume key clerical leadership positions. Even strong kings such as Clovis depended heavily upon aristocratic support to contain nobles' ambitions and authority. Kings thus had minimal direct authority over anyone outside their households and armies, though aristocrats were usually willing to follow the kings. Kings served as military commanders and sought to shape legal procedure by codifying laws, absorbing the apparatus of local administration, and controlling the collection of taxes. By presenting themselves as protectors of the church, kings came to claim responsibility for both the administration of justice and preserving the peace. And kings gained the assistance of educated clerics who could serve as royal advisors and administrators. One important Frank leader was Charles Martel. The years 688 to 741. So Martel was a leader was one of those of the Carolingian dynasty. Martel was a very tall and powerfully built man. He provided his cavalry soldiers with estates, which they retained as long as they provided military service. Martel's army won a crucial victory over the Muslims at Tours in the year 732. The Muslims were caught by surprise by Martel's army that was strategically positioned on a crest with trees to the flanks. Except for withdrawals, the Muslim invaders had no choice but charge uphill to engage Martel's dense lines of well-armored infantry. The Franks did not waver. One 8th century writer stated, quote, "Firmly they stood, one close to another, forming as it were a bulwark of ice." Despite the repeated Muslim charges, the Franks held the line and 10,000 Muslims died on the battlefield. Many historians view the Frankish victory at Tours as a major historical turning point, crucial to the survival of Western civilization. As for Martel, the hierarchical structure of the Roman Church appealed to him and his successors. They solidified their rule with the aid of the papacy. Martel's son, Pepin the Short, acquired political legitimacy when the Pope recognized him as king of the Franks. The Carolingians were the first European rulers to join royal and ecclesiastical legitimacy. This development raised important questions. When a pope anointed a king, did it give the king clerical status and authority over the church? Or did the act of a pope consecrating a king imply that a pope had the right to depose him? When Pepin died in 768, his sons Carloman and Charles shared control of the kingdom. But less than 3 years later, Carloman passed away prematurely, and Charles set out to build an empire. Charles the Great, also known as Charlemagne, reigned until his death in the year 814. The Great applies to Charlemagne's physical presence and impressive achievements. Throughout his reign, he expanded the kingdom of the Franks and introduced Roman Christianity to the conquered peoples. The papacy, seeking assistance and protection against regional enemies, repeatedly requested aid from Charlemagne. The Pope crowned him emperor on Christmas Day, the year 800. This Christmas gift conferred dignity and sanctity to Charlemagne's rule and confirmed the alliance between the Carolingians and the papacy as well as symbolically declaring the end of papal submission to the Byzantine emperor. Charlemagne was keenly aware of the shortcomings of domestic rule, and to consolidate his authority within the kingdom, he supervised his officials with personal visits and introduced annual assemblies in which important men voiced their concerns. A man of intellectual curiosity, Charlemagne was largely successful in rescuing Europe from illiteracy and cultural ignorance. He promoted the formation of institutions to recover learning from earlier times and other cultures. This effort became known as the Carolingian Renaissance. After Charlemagne, there was the development of feudalism, the further development. At the heart of the feudal system was the reciprocal lord-vassal relationship. As part of the agreement, the lord provided the vassal with justice and protection. The lords granted to the vassals sections of land called fiefs. In return, the vassal owed the lord loyalty and military service. From a simple beginning, the feudal system eventually developed into a complex structure with individuals acting as both lords and vassals in the evolving pyramid. While the system had the potential for chaos, it provided the opportunity for the kingdoms of England and France to develop into powerful states. The military contingent of the feudal system comprised only a small percentage at the top. The vast majority of the population lived as serfs on the manors of the nobles. The serfs, while not full slaves, existed as semi-free individuals and were legally tied to the manors of the great nobles. Their obligation to the nobles in labor service and produce made them the agricultural foundation of the feudal system. Advancements in agriculture assisted the emergence of Europe. In the late Roman Empire era, Germanic and other tribes focused more on raising cattle than planting field crops. When they did prepare land for crops, they used a slash and burn technique. When fields lost their fertility, these fields were abandoned and the process started all over again elsewhere. The Romans introduced a rotation two-course system where half the land was for crops and the other half was left alone. Switching back and forth kept the land fertile for a longer period. One difficulty for the Romans was the heavy soils of northwestern Europe that required heavier plows that they did not have. Although the date of origin is unclear, the Franks designed heavy wheeled plows to farm the fertile but heavy soils of the plains and valleys. In the late 8th century, France, the people introduced a 3-course rotation: a spring crop harvested in the summer, an autumn sowing of wheat harvested the following summer, and a year of fallow. This development and the arrival of global warming, known as the medieval warm period, was a boost for European population growth. I conclude with 3 summary points. With the emergence of Europe, the church became a powerful social organization. Christianity shaped societies as pagan religions declined. Second, the earlier stages of numerous kingdoms fighting and pillaging each other evolves into larger kingdoms that adopt feudalism. There is a rise of powerful kings with the support of aristocrats, and there are dynasties. Third, there is the introduction of better farming techniques, innovations such as a heavier plow, along with water mills and new methods of crop rotation, eventually allowed for increased agricultural production. This in turn sparked increased trade and urbanization, as well as an increase in the population of Europe. So by the year 1000, the population of Europe was at approximately 36 million. Thank you.